His mother set a place card at every seat that night. Mine wasn't one of them. I stood at the entrance of the Hartwell Grand Ballroom. My sister-in-law's retirement celebration, 500 guests, ice sculptures shaped like swans, and I watched my husband walk ahead of me without once looking back to see if I was still there. That should have told me everything. But I was still in the part of my life where I made excuses for people who had stopped making any for me. My name is Lorelei. I'm a commercial real estate attorney. I have negotiated contracts worth more than most people will earn in 3 lifetimes. I once argued a zoning case before a federal appellate panel at 31 years old and won. And on a Saturday evening in October, in a ballroom my mother-in-law had rented using money she'd borrowed from my personal savings account without asking, I was handed a laminated staff lanyard and told to keep to the perimeter. Let me back up. I met my husband Fletcher at a bar association conference in Chicago 9 years ago. He was charming, the way weather is charming. You don't question it, you just tilt your face toward it. He was a financial advisor then, good at his job, warm with people, and he looked at me like I was the most interesting person in any room we entered. For a woman who'd spent most of her life being the most capable person in a room and somehow still feeling overlooked, that attention felt like oxygen. We got married 3 years later in a small ceremony in Asheville. His mother, Rosalind, gave a toast that was really just a description of Fletcher's childhood achievements with a sentence tacked on at the end about how she was sure I'd be good for him. His sister, Pauline, caught my eye during that toast and gave me a look that said, I know, I'm sorry, welcome. That was the beginning of my real education about who I had married into. Rosalind was not cruel in obvious ways. She was cruel the way drafts are cruel. You can't quite locate the source, but you're always cold. She'd ask about my cases with a smile that suggested she found the law an eccentric hobby. She'd compliment my cooking by comparing it favorably to what Fletcher's college girlfriend used to make, a reference she deployed at least 4 times a year with the precision of someone who had practiced it. She called me by name approximately never. To her friends, I was Fletcher's wife. To the household, I was, functionally, staff. Fletcher and I had been together 7 years when the cracks stopped being cracks and started being fault lines. It began, as these things often do, with money. 3 years ago, I made partner at my firm. The bonus that accompanied that promotion was substantial, enough that Fletcher and I had a real conversation about what to do with it. We decided together we'd put it into a joint savings account, earmarked for a down payment on a bigger home, maybe something with a yard for the dog we kept talking about getting. I transferred the funds. I remember the exact date because I'd texted Fletcher a photo of the confirmation screen with 3 balloon emojis. 8 months later, I happened to pull up that account while doing our taxes. The balance was $43,000 lighter than it should have been. I am an attorney. My first instinct was not to panic. My first instinct was to document. I printed every transaction statement going back 14 months. I sat at the kitchen table on a Tuesday morning while Fletcher was at the gym, and I laid them out in chronological order the way I'd lay out evidence. The withdrawals were structured, just under the reporting threshold each time, spread across 3 months, ending before I'd have had any reason to look. Whoever had done this knew enough about banking regulations to be careful. That narrowed things considerably. I didn't confront Fletcher that day. I didn't confront him for 6 weeks. Instead, I hired a forensic accountant, a woman named Dr. Albright, who I'd used as an expert witness in a business fraud case 2 years prior, and I asked her to trace the money. It took her 3 weeks. The funds had moved through Fletcher's individual brokerage account and then, in smaller pieces, into an account belonging to Rosalind. Not alone. Not with any documentation. Not with my knowledge or consent. $43,000, and the only record of it was a series of transfers with a memo field that read variously family support personal gift. I sat with that information for 2 more weeks. I went to work. I made dinner. I attended a birthday party for our neighbor's daughter and stood in their backyard with a glass of wine, laughing at something someone said, while in the back of my mind I was building a case the way I build all my cases, carefully, without emotion, one verified fact at a time. What I found when I kept looking was worse than I'd expected. Rosalind had been telling people, her friends, her book club, the women she played pickleball with on Thursday mornings, that she and Fletcher were planning to purchase a vacation property in the Outer Banks. A family investment, she called it. She'd apparently been showing people photos of the property. She'd had an offer accepted. With my money. There was more. The forensic accountant found an older pattern, smaller, earlier, going back almost to the beginning of my marriage. Christmas loans that were never repaid. A car repair that Fletcher had covered from our joint checking without mentioning it to me. 3 years of quarterly transfers averaging $800, each time around Rosalind's credit card billing cycle. I added it up. Over 6 years, approximately $92,000 had moved from our household finances to Rosalind's lifestyle. Some of it Fletcher had surely known about. Some of it. The $43,000. I was not certain he had authorized, or whether his mother had accessed his accounts using credentials she'd apparently had since he was in college and he'd never thought to change. I needed to know which, and I needed to know it before I decided what to do. The answer came, as answers so often do, from a conversation I wasn't meant to hear. Pauline, my sister-in-law, the one who'd given me the sympathetic look at the wedding toast, was retiring from her position as a hospital administrator after 26 years. It was a genuine achievement, and her retirement party was a real event. 450 RSVPs, a ballroom at the Hartwell Grand, a catered dinner, a string quartet. Rosalind had offered to organize it, which in retrospect was a thing I should have questioned, because Rosalind organizing an event always meant Rosalind controlling an event. 2 weeks before the party, I was in the hallway outside Fletcher's home office when I heard him on the phone with his mother. The door wasn't fully closed. I wasn't eavesdropping so much as standing very still. "She doesn't need to sit at the family table," Rosalind was saying. I could hear her through the phone, her voice carrying the particular clarity of someone who enunciates it when they feel righteous. "Put her with the hospital staff. She can help manage the gift table. Tell her it's an honor." There was a pause. Fletcher said, "She'll notice." Rosalind said, "She'll adjust. She always does." Another pause. "And the lanyard situation?" Fletcher said, "I've ordered them. Staff lanyards. With the venue logo. She can wear one in. Nobody will know she's not actually working the event." I stood in that hallway for what felt like a long time. My breathing was very steady. I've spent 20 years learning to keep my breathing steady in situations that warrant the opposite. Then I went into the kitchen and I made tea, and I thought about what it meant that my husband's response to his mother's plan was not, "We are not doing this to my wife," but rather, "She'll notice." Not, "This is wrong." Not, "She deserves better." But, "Will she catch us?" I had my answers about how much he knew. I called Dr. Albright the next morning and asked her to prepare a formal report. I called my colleague James, who handles matrimonial law, and I asked him a series of questions framed as hypothetical. I called my bank and I moved my personal accounts, the ones that were solely in my name, to a different institution. I updated my passwords. I printed copies of everything and put them in my office safe. And then I did something that probably seems strange. I RSVP'd for the party. For both of us. I want to be precise about why. I didn't go to humiliate anyone. I didn't go to make a scene. I went because Pauline deserved to have someone at that party who actually cared about her, and because I had spent 6 years shrinking myself to fit into rooms where I wasn't welcome, and I was done doing that hallway, that I was done doing that quietly. If Rosalind wanted to put me in a staff lanyard, fine, I would wear it, and then I would make sure that everyone at that event learned, before the night was over, exactly who I was. The evening of the party, I wore a navy dress I'd bought in Milan 2 years ago on a work trip. Simple cut, expensive fabric, the kind of thing that looks understated until it doesn't. I wore the pearl earrings my mother had left me. I did my own hair. Fletcher was quiet in the car. He didn't comment on my dress. He asked twice if I was feeling okay, which is what he always did when he was nervous. "I'm wonderful," I said, and I meant it in a way he couldn't parse. We arrived and Rosalind was at the entrance in a floor-length gold gown that she had clearly chosen to signal that she was the most important woman in the building. She air-kissed Fletcher's cheek and looked at me with the particular expression she reserved for things she found tolerable but inconvenient. "Lorelei," she said, "so glad you could make it." She reached into a tote bag she was holding and produced a Lanyard, clear plastic badge holder. Inside it, a card that read Hartwell Grand Event Staff. "We're asking everyone helping tonight to wear one of these. For coordination's purposes." I looked at the lanyard, I looked at Rosalind, I took it and put it on. Her mouth did something small and satisfied. What she didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that in my evening bag I had a folder, and in that folder was a certified letter from Dr. Albright's firm, a printed summary of 6 years of financial transactions, and a single-page document that I had prepared myself in plain language, outlining every dollar that had moved from my accounts to Rosalind's without my authorization. I also had in my phone contacts the number of the Hartwell County District Attorney's office and the number of a journalist who covers financial fraud for the state's largest newspaper, and the number of 3 senior partners at my firm who had been waiting for my call. I went to the gift table. I arranged the gift table with meticulous attention. I straightened every card. I aligned every bow. I did it with the same focus I bring to preparing a brief, because focus is focus, and it doesn't matter what the task is. At some point, Rosalind circulated past me and said something to a woman I didn't recognize, something low, with a small gesture toward me, and the woman looked at me and nodded and said. Rosalind smiled. "Staff," something like that. The dinner was served. I was not directed to a table with the guests. I found a chair near the gift table and sat in it. Fletcher, across the ballroom at the family table, looked at me once, just once, across 200 feet of candlelight and linen and string quartet. His expression was something I don't have a clean word for. Not guilt, exactly. More like the face of someone watching a situation they created and discovering they can't control it. Pauline found me 40 minutes into dinner service. She was carrying a plate of food, and she had the expression of someone who had just figured out something she should have figured out sooner. "What are you doing over here?" she said. "Your mother assigned me the gift table." Pauline put the plate down in front of me and sat across from me and said, in a voice that was very quiet and very clear, "Lorelei, I had nothing to do with this." "I know," I said, and I did. "What are you going to do?" I looked at her. Pauline, who had given me that look at the wedding toast, who had called me on bad days to check in, who had texted me when my father had his surgery, who was, in all the ways that mattered, the only member of that family who had ever treated me like a person. "I'm going to let them finish dinner," I said. "And then I'm going to say goodnight to you because you deserve a good retirement and tonight should be about that. And then I'm going to do what I should have done 8 months ago." Pauline looked at me for a long moment. "The money," she said. I didn't confirm or deny. I just looked at her steadily, and she closed her eyes for a second and said, "How much?" "Enough," I said. "Don't worry about tonight. Just go enjoy your party." She squeezed my hand across the table and went. After the toasts, 5 of them, 3 of which were really about Rosalind, I stood up from my chair by the gift table. I removed the lanyard from around my neck. I set it on the table next to a card that read "Congratulations, Pauline" in looping gold script. I walked across the ballroom to the family table. Fletcher saw me coming and something shifted in his posture. Relief, maybe, or apprehension. It was hard to tell anymore. "I'm heading out," I said, quietly, conversationally, as if I were leaving any ordinary party. "Everything okay?" he said. "I left my wedding ring in the car," I said. "I'll send you the rest of your things." He blinked. "I'm sorry? You'll want to call your attorney on Monday," I said. "I'll be filing paperwork Tuesday morning." And then I walked out of the Hartwell Grand Ballroom through the main entrance, not the service entrance, not the side door, with my head level and my hands steady, and the feeling you get when something you've been carrying for a very long time finally drops. I sat in my car in the parking garage for 12 minutes. I want to be honest about that. I didn't walk out in a cinematic sweep and immediately feel triumphant. I sat in the dark and I breathed and I let myself feel the full weight of what I had just ended. 6 years. A dog we'd never gotten, a yard we'd never bought, a version of my life I'd believed in. Then I picked up my phone and I sent 3 emails. The first was to James, my matrimonial law colleague, attaching Dr. Albright's certified report and confirming that we would meet Tuesday morning to review the filing. The second was to my firm's senior partner, letting her know that I would be pursuing civil recovery on a personal matter and requesting a brief conflict check. The third was to the journalist. I didn't allege anything. I simply said that I had documentation of a structured financial transfer pattern that might be of interest to her, and that I was available to speak. I drove home. I made myself a cup of tea. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I had laid out those bank statements 8 months ago, and I looked at the city lights through the window for a while. On Monday, Fletcher's called 11 times. I let them go to voicemail. His attorney called my office Tuesday afternoon, 20 minutes after my filing confirmation came through. Dr. Albright's report went to the DA's office on Wednesday. Wire fraud and financial elder abuse statutes are complicated in North Carolina, but unauthorized account access and structuring transactions to avoid reporting thresholds are not complicated at all. The DA's office opened a preliminary inquiry within the week. Rosalind's attorney sent a letter the following Monday asserting that all funds transferred had been gifts authorized by Fletcher. Fletcher's attorney sent a letter 2 days later, clarifying that Fletcher had not authorized all transfers and asserting that his mother had accessed his accounts without his explicit consent for some portion of the activity. It is clarifying, watching people in a legal dispute decide whose version of events is most useful for their own protection. The vacation property in the Outer Banks was under contract. The earnest money had been deposited. The closing was scheduled for 6 weeks out. Because the funds used for that deposit were traceable to my account, my partnership bonus, documented, transferred, traceable. The title company received a legal notice the week before closing. The transaction did not proceed. I heard through Pauline, who called me every few weeks, careful and kind, because she was that kind of person, that Rosalind had told her book club that I had gone after the family out of spite, that I was vindictive, that I had always resented her son's relationship with his family. I didn't respond to that. Rosalind was entitled to her narrative. I had the bank records. The civil case settled 8 months later. Fletcher's attorney negotiated hard, but the documentation was airtight and the DA inquiry was still open, and eventually the calculus became clear. I recovered the bulk of the funds. Not every dollar. Legal settlements never return every dollar, but enough. Enough that the number in my savings account on the Tuesday morning I checked it was larger than it had been the day before I met Fletcher. The divorce was finalized 11 months after I set that lanyard down on the gift table. Pauline called me the week after the finalization to tell me she was sorry. Not sorry the way people are sorry when they feel guilty. Sorry the way people are sorry when something good is over, and they'd have done anything to save it except the one thing that would have saved it, which was to intervene sooner. I told her she had nothing to apologize for. I meant it. "Do you regret going to the party?" she asked. I thought about it honestly. "No," I said. "I regret waiting until the party. I should have acted sooner. But I needed to know everything first, and that night I knew everything." "What would you have done differently?" I thought about the hallway outside Fletcher's office and how I'd stood there in socks on hardwood with tea going cold in the kitchen and heard my husband say, "She'll notice," instead of "We are not doing this." "Nothing," I said. I would have done it exactly the same, just 8 months earlier. There's a thing that happens when you've worked in law as long as I have. You stop expecting justice to be dramatic. Justice is paperwork. Justice is a settlement agreement and a certified check and a Tuesday morning when you log into your account and the number is right again. But there's another kind of justice that doesn't have a legal name. It's the moment when someone who designed a room to make you invisible realizes that you were never actually invisible, you were just deciding when to be seen. The lanyard is still in my desk drawer at work. I kept it. Not as a trophy, not out of bitterness. I kept it because on bad days, when a case is hard or a negotiation goes sideways or I feel that old familiar draft of being underestimated, I open the drawer and look at it. Hartwell Grand Events staff. They put it around my neck to tell me where I belonged. I set it down to show them they were wrong.